Hello and welcome to the Melter Podcast. I'm Mike Clarkson. My guest in today's podcast is Philip Moore. He's the head and founder of the Cambridge Institut in Munich. We're going to talk about the school, both today and its history in post-war Germany, plus its role as the centre of the Cambridge exams. Philip, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Pleasure.
Let's start, Philip, by explaining to maybe people who don't know what the Cambridge Institute is. We're actually sat in the Cambridge Institute now on a cold, wet January day here in Munich, Residenzstraße. Philip, perhaps you'd like to situate us by just telling us something about what is the Cambridge Institute.
Well, the Cambridge Institute has two functions, and it's always had these two functions. It actually began as an examination centre for Cambridge exams. But this was way back 1961, and there weren't many Cambridge exams. There were just two. There was the proficiency, as we have today, and there was then what was called the lower certificate.
Was that like first or more PET, or what kind of level was that?
It was what has now become the first certificate.
Yeah.
The problem was Cambridge called this Cambridge local. It was called Cambridge Local Examination Syndicate, and what they meant by local exams were not examinations that were held internally in the university, but for people outside the university. In those days, local. It was not a worldwide exam.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, when you say local, do you just mean people from Munich or?
No, I'm talking about Cambridge. Now, before the Cambridge Munich.
Right,
I'm just talking about worldwide.
Sorry, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there was this part of the university which was called local examinations, and they called themselves a syndicate. And Cambridge began an examination, or rather introduced an examination which was not for Cambridge students, undergraduates, but for the local population, what we call now the worldwide population, just before the First World War, 1913.
Oh wow, such a long time ago.
And they introduced this because there was an exodus of mainly German Jews, and they were being persecuted not by Germans but by Russians. There was an exodus, and a large number of these German Jews before the First War came to England, came to London, came to a part of London called Golders Green. I don't know if you know that.
It's the large Jewish population.
That's right, and it still has a large Jewish population. Good. In order to find employment, they had to show some qualification of their English. And Cambridge then introduced an examination, which is what we call nowadays C2 level, which was the proficiency in civics, the proficiency. And I think it was in 1913 or perhaps 1914, they held the first exam, and there were 6 candidates, and they were all German, and they all failed. But you can laugh, but the exam went on for about 3 days.
3 days?
Oh, yes.
How long was the speaking part?
Well, there probably wasn't a speaking part.
Okay.
Speaking wasn't considered, I think, terribly important.
Right.
And then, shortly before the Second World War, I don't know whether there's any connection here, they introduced another exam because they realised that the proficiency was too high a level.
Yep.
Everyone was failing. And they introduced what they called this lower exam.
Okay.
Which until the 70s was called the lower exam, and then it became the first exam. Because the problem with calling something the lower exam, they realised they wanted to introduce an examination at a level below the lower exam. So what would you call it? You can't call it the lowest exam.
The lowest of the low. Exactly.
So they then changed the name from lower to first. But then they still had a problem. But in the meantime, Oxford University came along as competition and introduced exam. And they solved the problem, but they introduced an exam called the preliminary examination. And we became a centre not only for the Cambridge exam, but also for the Oxford exams. We were the first overseas Oxford exam centre.
So you're talking here about 1961, or what?
We're talking now, much later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're talking now about the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's in the 70s was when the Oxford exam...
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Which was much more spoken orientated than the Cambridge exam. Cambridge exams are very academic, as you can imagine. But then Oxford lost interest in the early 90s. And they sold their exam to Cambridge. And that's where a Cambridge preliminary exam comes. It's not really, it wasn't originally a Cambridge exam, it was an Oxford exam.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is what has become PET, right?
But if we go back to the origin of the Cambridge Institute,
Yes.
we go back to 1961.
Yes.
And at that time, 1961 was early post-war.
It was. It was only, 16 years after the end of the war?
Exactly. Now, there had been, there was the only other centre for Cambridge exams in 1961 was in Cologne.
Was that an independent school, or was that run by a university?
That was what was it called? Institut. Cologne. It was German owned. But they were there before the war. Because, as I said, Cambridge began their exams 1913 with proficiency.
So when you say the war, you mean the Second or the First World War?
Well, it's the Second World War.
Second World War.
Good. And prior to the Second World War, there was a centre, I think, in Berlin, and a centre, Cambridge Centre, in Cologne.
Okay.
Post-Second World War, Berlin, of course, was part of the Soviet zone, and there were no Cambridge. So that just left then Cologne. Good. 1961, do you want me to talk about myself here?
Whatever you
Because
want,
this-
Philip. It's all interesting. It's all
I-
interesting.
I-
Yes, yes.
I created the Cambridge Institute.
Right, exactly.
I've taken what they called a postgraduate certificate of education at Oxford University.
Uh-huh.
And then before settling down as a teacher in the UK, I'm talking now about 1958,
Okay.
before settling down as a teacher, I thought I'd like to spend some time in Germany because I took German to O-level.
So that was the only reason that you chose Germany, because you'd done German at O-level?
So
Was that the only reason you chose Germany, because of the O-level, or was there another?
I had German to
Yeah.
O-level and French to O-level.
Sure.
French was always
Yeah.
first for language.
Yeah.
Good. And I thought I'd like to improve my German. Because when I was at school and did O-levels,
Yeah.
I had a stammer.
Really?
Left-handed people like myself often have stammers. Have you noticed how many more English people stammer than German?
I haven't really, but I will from now on. I'm sure I will notice it.
Well, the reason being is there are more left-handed people
Is that right?
in Britain
Really?
than there are in Germany.
Really? Is there any science
I
behind
think-
that? Or is there anything?
Because Germany and education and at home too have been very strict about using the right hand. So if you started using the left hand, they smacked you on the left hand to use the right
So people who were naturally left-handed were forced,
it
basically,
was,
to...
it was seen as something unnatural.
Yes, yes.
But in Britain, I think people were more open-minded. But the trouble is with left-handed people is that if the part of the brain which affects or controls the left-handed side of it is overdeveloped, it's in juxtaposition with the part of the brain that controls your speech.
I see.
And if that left-handedness is overdeveloped, it will infringe on the part of the brain that controls the speech, hence the stammer.
Really? Okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you can imagine having a stammer and having German and having to speak German
Yes.
to a group, well, in a class of 30.
Yeah.
Well, over half of them are giggling girls.
God.
It was so, but I grew out of the stammer, and then my interest in German came back. So I thought, after completing my postgraduate certificate education at Oxford, I thought I'd spend some time in Germany improving my German. I no longer stammer. Because you can imagine German is not, it's very guttural language,
Yes.
as you know. And if you have a stammer, it's doubly difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's gegangen.
Exactly. That must be, yeah.
It's a contraction of the throat. That is.
Exactly, right.
I came to Germany and I saw, while I was still in England, I saw an advertisement for a school in Goslar. Do you know where Goslar is?
Goslar I've heard of, because I had a student once who
It's in the
worked...
Harz.
Yeah,
It's a lovely part of
yeah,
Germany,
yeah,
actually.
yeah. Mhm.
It's sort of close to Hanover.
Yeah, okay.
But the trouble was, I went to that school in the September and of 58, I think it was. And they went broke. It was a private thing, but they went broke. I don't know if it was my fault. But they went broke and closed at Easter. And I thought, this is a bit stupid, my German's just getting better.
Yeah.
So then I came to Munich.
Okay. Did you choose Munich for any particular reason?
I chose Munich because when I was at Oxford, I joined what was called the Oxford Mountaineering Club.
Ah, really? Okay. This is the place for hiking in mountains, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Munich was called speed climbing centre.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. So that brought me to Munich.
Okay,
Yes,
that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, go on.
Well, there were two schools in language schools where I could possibly work.
Sorry, these were schools that already existed in Munich when you came, yes?
Sorry?
These were schools that already existed in Munich when you arrived. Are you saying, or?
Well, I came to Munich, looked for work, and there was two schools.
Yeah.
One school was called locally the Schmidt-Schule, which is the Sprachen- und Dolmetsch-Institut. Not the municipal one, but the private one.
Okay.
And it was called, interestingly, the Schmidt-Schule. And do you know why it was called the Schmidt-Schule? Because it was founded by a German called Paul Schmidt. Now, Paul Schmidt was very interesting because he was state interpreter in the late 20s, from the time of the Locarno Treaty in 28, I think, right through the 30s, right up to the end of the war. And he wrote, it's very interesting, he wrote an autobiography called, what was it called? For goodness sake. I've forgotten what it's called now. But it was very interesting. There was an English translation of part of it. Yes, in German it's called Statist auf diplomatischer Bühne. And this was translated into English as Hitler's interpreter.
No. Brilliant name. Almost a direct translation too. That is amazing.
Well, the Sprachen- und Dolmetscher, I would have liked to work there because it was full of young ladies from families who could afford their young child, their daughter, to have this further private education. But I couldn't get a job there. I didn't have the qualifications. But the only other school, of course, is the Berlin School.
Before you go into the Berlin School, let me just ask you, so the guy who set up...
Paul Schmidt.
Yeah, exactly, Paul Schmidt. Was he actually Hitler's interpreter? Was he doing interpretive translation work for Hitler or not?
What's he, sorry?
Was he doing translation stuff for Hitler?
Oh yes,
he was.
Oh yes, he was Hitler's interpreter.
He was really Hitler's interpreter.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you were an interpreter, what you would have, you would have Hitler, and then you would have his counterpart, and there would be Paul Schmidt.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and the counterpart says English, and Paul Schmidt and the English would say something, and then he'd pause and allow Paul Schmidt to translate the German, and then Hitler spoke.
Right.
Yeah, then pause, and Paul Schmidt then would translate.
Right.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I saw a black and white television interview, BBC interview with Paul Schmidt after the war.
Right.
Yeah. And at one time, the topic got round to the Holocaust. And Paul Schmidt said the Holocaust was not my cup of tea. And I thought...
Not my cup of tea.
Was not my cup of tea. I thought, idioms are difficult.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
And that was interesting.
It's interesting because if his English wasn't actually so good that he was using idioms inappropriately, you have to ask yourself how he was translating for Hitler.
Well, yes. I mean, what he was doing, he was he was leaving out parts of what Hitler was saying, which he thought were unpleasant or what have you. Oh yes, there's complete distortion. And he never, Punchman's English was good from the point of view as a German sees English, good grammar and so on. But his idioms, you see, not my cup of tea.
Yes, exactly.
Good. Which made me interested in idioms.
Yes, indeed.
And idioms, of course, are very difficult.
As we know, Germans still struggle with idioms today.
They are difficult.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. So,
Sorry, can I just ask a question related to that? I mean, a lot of people, some people would maybe have said that Mr. Schmidt was actually a collaborator of some sort, that he was, he should have been put on trial for actually assisting the Third Reich and Hitler. Did that ever materialise?
No, it didn't actually.
Okay.
No, because, he was, of course, a state interpreter. I said from the Locarno Treaty onwards, upon 28 onwards. And of course Hitler didn't come to power until 33. Good. And he continued as state interpreter. Good. But that doesn't make him, a party to the party.
So anyway, he was unaffected by his, let's say, his Nazi past. He's in Munich. He's set up a private language school.
Exactly.
So what exactly was the kind of what was it with how was it in Munich and Germany at that time as regards the Nazi times and all the rest? It's only 15, 16 years after the war. Was Munich actually rebuilt? Was the whole thing still work in progress? What exactly was it like, Philip?
Well, Munich was flattened. This building did not exist. Good. It's been rebuilt as it was, but it didn't exist. The whole street, Maximilianstrasse, was one side, the Opera House side, was flattened. Strangely enough, the Hotel Filialseiten still stood. But everything between the Hotel Filialseiten and here was flattened. The Opera House had no roof. This was in the 60s.
Wow.
I can remember the Opera House without a roof. Good. The whole stretch of road from Maximilianstrasse to Isertor was just a bomb site.
At the end of the street, the Feldherrnhalle, that wasn't touched either, was it?
That stood, but it was very, very badly damaged.
Okay.
What you had in the Feldherrnhalle, of course, in 1923, this was the Putsch Versuch.
Exactly.
When Hitler was wounded and ran off to, I'm not quite sure where he ran off, but he was captured and put into Landsberg for 2 years. That's where he wrote My Country.
That's right.
Good. And there used to be, if you walk out of this street, the Residenzstrasse, along the side wall of the Feldherrnhalle were bullet
holes. Really?
Yeah. And this is where the police and the protesters.
So these are bullet holes from the Putsch attempt itself.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That's where the clash was.
Right.
That was where Hitler was wounded.
Right.
Just Yeah, opposite the filter.
There's actually a plaque, I think, on the ground, isn't there?
Well,
there used to be. I don't know.
Well, they used to be,
Yeah.
and during the 30s, before the Second World War, probably during the Second World War, you had to give the Hitler
Yes.
goose whenever you passed
Yes.
there.
That's right. Hence the narrow street just behind it, right, which people used to take to avoid.
That exactly, you know.
I've seen my documentaries. Yes.
No, exactly.
So I mean, for a Brit, for an English person, what was it like?
Well, I was welcomed, I think, with open arms. What they did behind my back, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I lived in a garret. I began the Cambridge Institute in Hildegardstrasse, in Hildegardstrasse 8, which is a sort of crossroads on the corner.
So this is not the one that I knew from 7-8 years ago. That near Institut. What was that one?
That's right.
It is in the same. I couldn't remember the address. That is the same.
That's right. Yeah. Good. Yeah, and I happened, because I was in Munich for 2 years working at the Berlitz School before I started the Cambridge Institute. I started the Cambridge in 61, 1st of April.
I interrupted you earlier about you wanted to say something about the Berlitz, because they were actually the first language school, were they?
They were the first language school that used the direct method in teaching.
Direct method, here we are, okay.
And you have to hand it to, whatever you think of the Berlitz School, you have to hand it to them. They were pioneers.
Yes. And so for example, Mr. Schmitz's school, that was more traditional.
Yeah,
German was used.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Training translators and so on is more traditional.
Sure.
Yeah. Good. But if you've been at the Berlitz School sometime, you realised it wasn't, God's gift to. And that's when I decided, and I persuaded a fellow teacher, not in English, but we could do better than this.
Okay.
And it began in Hildegardstrasse 8, which has 4 floors. And we were there for 50 years.
Yes.
Yeah. Until 2015.
Yeah.
We began in 61. And I lived in this under the roof in a garret, one room.
Did you?
And I would go off to the Volksbad, next door to the Deutsches Museum, once a week to have a shower.
Well, in those days, once a week was more than enough, wasn't it?
But the whole neighbourhood went off once a week. It was a Friday. I don't know why. Yeah. Because the sanitation was minimal. But I was often invited to. I was on this 4th floor, Hildegardstrasse 8, the other side, which coincidentally was the other side of the road to where I started the Cambridge Institute. And I was often invited to supper or something. And a particular neighbour, he was a nice bloke, he'd been in the army and so on. In fact, I think he'd been in the German Navy because he was very fond of singing German march songs. Yes, expecting me to join.
Okay.
And his favourite one was, I don't know if you know it, is Wenn wir fahren gegen England.
Okay.
I can sing it to you if you wish.
Maybe later. It sounds like something you'd sing on a football terrace more than anything. But anyway, it's a naval song, you say. Yeah. Okay. And what about the actual people's desire or need to actually learn English? I mean, you said that for the first ever exam, there were just 4 candidates.
Yeah. I mean, there was, obviously, the 60s, it was a beginning of, it was, you had the aftermath of war, which we've been talking about.
Sure.
And then the expansion of, trade became international. Obviously, English became important. And English was neglected, of course, because during the war.
Yeah. I imagine there wasn't much demand for English classes during the war.
I mean, we started off in this 4-story building.
Yeah.
We rented half of the first floor, 3 rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, about 10 years later, we had the whole building. Yeah, there was a great demand for English.
There was. Okay. Was it for people who needed it for work reasons?
I don't think so, because my memory of it was middle-aged ladies wearing hats. Because it was a time when middle-aged ladies wore hats, and they didn't take the hats off. I've got some photographs somewhere. They didn't take the hats off in the lesson.
Did they not? Okay.
But to show you how different the world was, we had no furniture.
No furniture.
Rooms. Yeah.
Well, you must have had chairs for people to sit down. Sure.
No, what we did, in Victualienmarkt, there was an American Army surplus store. And they sold solid, heavy wooden furniture, chairs. And they were heavy, and we carried them physically from Victualienmarkt to the Hildegardstrasse, these big chairs. But then we had no tables. And then we made our own tables. You get a big 4 meters by 1.5 meters plywood. Sure. And then you can buy legs.
Yes.
You screwed on the legs and so on. So we made our own tables.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did you do? Did you have like a blackboard? I mean, how were you writing stuff down? Were you for the students? Did you have a blackboard or?
That's a good question. We weren't without blackboards. I much prefer blackboards to whiteboards, actually. I don't know about you. I don't know if you're familiar with blackboards.
I'm old enough to remember blackboards from my school days, Philip. Yes, of course. Yeah. Good old chalk.
Exactly. Much prefer blackboards to chalk. These slippery things.
Yeah. And they make your hands filthy, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
Bring back the chalk and the blackboard.
Exactly.
Yes, okay.
But it sounds the majority of your students would be beginners, as I said.
They would be?
They'd be beginners.
Beginners,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they would stay for months and months. The average attendance was about 5-6 months.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. And that is a sad thing, I think, that you don't have that now. It's
much less, probably.
Not very much. I mean, my literature course, I've got a woman there who's been coming for the last 30 years. Yeah.
But you do get students here who come for months on end. They do course after course.
They don't stay very long.
I have students who, from companies, they're in courses for several years.
Well, I think most company courses haven't, more about this than myself, but I think they suffered with COVID.
Yeah.
You used to go into companies, but I think...
Well, it's all online now. The vast majority is online.
Exactly.
Which is But it works.
Yeah.
And as far as the English language was concerned at that time, I mean, you were saying that there was an interest in it. I mean, Was English the main language at that time, or was it still French?
Well, we started off
Yeah.
by calling. We had to give a name to the school, and we couldn't call ourselves a Schule because the ministry said you'd have to have proper toilets and this.
So you couldn't use the name Schule or the English word school?
Well, we began, although it was called Cambridge Institute, we called it the Cambridge Institute for Sprachen because we began with teaching English and French.
English and French. Okay.
And French.
Right.
And the reason why French is because at that time I had a girlfriend who was in fact a French woman teaching at the Berlin school. Good. And we said, okay, we go together. But that relationship...
So sorry, it wasn't because French was as important as English. That wasn't the case.
Sorry?
It wasn't the case that French was as popular as Indian.
No, that was just because that...
Okay.
Anyway, that relationship broke up.
Yeah.
And we called ourselves the Cambridge Institute. Institute, the ministry had no objection to it. For Sprachen.
Okay.
And then, when French dropped out, we left out the Versprachen, I guess, at Cambridge Institute.
Interesting.
Yeah. But what we did have, we had German courses. Now, what is interesting is that German courses have just come back again with migrants and so on.
So at that time there were already migrants. Is this the famous kind of Gastarbeiter?
The German courses we ran for English businessmen.
Really? Okay.
We advertised in the Times or something like that. And this was a time when Britain and Germany were trying to build up trade relationships. Sure. And that's why we had this. Yeah. That didn't last for that long, but it's interesting that German has come back again for different reasons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And so, despite the conditions that you were forced to be in with your third-hand furniture and plywood tables, you soon managed to expand, your popularity rose, and you were able to actually take over the whole building.
But first of all, we took over the first floor.
Yeah.
But that before we took it over, in the other half of the first floor, there was a married couple. There was, and they were fairly young. And the man had one arm. I think he lost an arm in the war.
Yeah.
And he was continually quarrelling with his wife, and they had a small baby.
Okay.
So you can imagine it wasn't very easy to teach when you had this argument. Okay.
Exactly.
So, it wasn't easy.
No.
But as you didn't know anything else, you didn't realise it wasn't easy.
Well, exactly, yes. Okay.
When we started, it was mainly beginners.
Yeah.
Because the Germans had no English during the war and in the first years after the war.
Yeah.
But that then died out slowly. But then with reunification of East Germany, West Germany, 1989, and then you had an influx of East Germans into West Germany because the employment was in West Germany.
Yes.
There was very little employment in East Germany.
Yeah.
And so you had the influx of East Germans also with no English,
Right.
because Russian was the first language
Yes.
after the war in East Germany. So then we had this resurgence of beginners. And that has also, of course, faded. And I think nowadays it seems we've always had two irons in the fire, exams and courses.
Yes.
And I think nowadays exams are very much predominant. And I think people are less interested in language for its own sake, but as acquiring a qualification for their...
Absolutely. But I mean, in order to pass the exam, they often do actually do classes, right, beforehand, and they come here to prepare themselves for the exam.
But they're already... It's more about what is the exam about, what is the content of the exam, rather than raising a level.
Right. Have you noticed that, as I have, that particularly the last 10, 15 years, the I think the English that young people learn at school nowadays is much better than they used to be, and when kids, as long as they go to a nice middle class school, they get to the age of 17, 18, they actually have a very nice level of English.
Yeah.
That must be a massive difference from 20.
Yeah, I mean, for very many years, the method of teaching a foreign language was not the direct method in schools. It was a translation method.
Yeah.
And I think a lot more English is spoken in lessons now in schools.
On the direct method, Philip, well, I mean, for beginners, I'm not really 100% sure. I mean, I was trained in this method years and years ago, but with complete beginners, I'm really not sure that is the most effective method. Some of the language of the learner is sometimes useful. Is it not? Would you agree or not?
Sorry, some of the language?
Of the learner, the mother tongue of the learner.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, all mistakes you could trace back to the mother tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, for example, translation used to play a much more important role in language teaching. And of course, translation is a retrograde step. What you're trying to do, you're trying to get away from the mother tongue and dream and thinking in English here. But I still think, and in the course I have, my literature, culture and translation, at a higher level, say C1 above, translation is very interesting.
Yep.
And I don't think then introduces more mistakes. But there was in German teaching many years translation even from a very low level. Yeah. Which was not good.
But as you said, for high levels, translation
I think translation, it's
for accuracy, for improving.
Well, for accuracy, I mean, for idiom,
right?
It's itself, and idioms are idioms are very important. It's the colour in a language. I mean, I'm using idioms all the time. Yeah. In fact, I'm a bit lost if I can't think of an idiom.
The interesting thing about it is, I mean, Germans use a lot of idioms themselves.
Yes.
And so I think most languages do, right? It's a integral part of any language.
Yeah. But idioms is a time and place, isn't there? There's certain register, certain degree of familiarity. Rather like the one I said, the Holy Ghost is not my cup of tea. I thought, he's got it wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
We hope he got it wrong. Maybe he was actually telling us what he really thought. Slightly unpleasant old chap. Well, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up, Philip, I'd like to ask you, what do you see the future of the English language teaching and also the Cambridge Institute? How do you see the future developing?
The Cambridge Institute. I don't know, because it looks as though Germany's heading for a recession.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's been no growth for the last, I think, 2 years. And a recession has always been, over the years, has always been something positive for the Cambridge Institute.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, because people feel, well, because of the danger of being unemployed, people realise the importance of qualifications.
Uh-huh. Okay, yes.
If you've got full employment, why should I bother?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Why should I bother?
Good point.
If you're in the danger of being unemployed or you are unemployed, then you're looking for qualifications. So a recession, has touch wood, has always had a positive influence on the Cambridge Institute. But it's very difficult to say.
And as far as the English language is concerned, do you see the English language remaining dominant linguistically for the foreseeable future?
I think so. I think so. I think it would be nice to think that German will play a prominent part, but I don't know.
The German language?
Sorry?
The German language?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the German language is very important, it's a beautiful language and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got worldwide trade,
Yes.
then, and you're speaking to Chinese in English, English has always been important, and you used to talk about pidgin English, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in other words, you were using English in the 19th century when you're trading with China. Well, there's a difference, isn't there, between post-Second World War and post-First World War.
Yes.
Post-First World War, the Germans felt they'd been
Betrayed.
They got the wrong end of a deal.
Exactly right.
Yeah. But in the Second World War, it was an utter defeat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But did obviously they felt defeated. But did they feel that they were more victims, or did they feel that they were guilty?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think because I think for very many Germans, they were unaware of concentration camps, Auschwitz and so on. Yeah.
You really think
I
think most people were unaware of what actually happened?
I think
in these
so.
camps?
I think so. I married a German girl who was at Cambridge Institute, and her father was a doctor, and I had conversations with him, and I think genuinely they were unaware of the atrocities that were being committed.
But they knew of the existence of labour camps, shall we say? They just didn't know that they were extermination camps.
Well, a place like Auschwitz, it was, where was it? In Poland.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, these trains were taking people away. And I think the people who were on trains were not. I don't think they were necessarily aware that they were going into gas chambers.
No. Oh, that's right.
So I think generally there was an unawareness of the.
I get that. Well, isn't it also the case, Philip? I don't know if you, in your experience, you would agree with this, that a lot of Germans are actually complicit. A lot of Germans, although they maybe didn't know that so many, in the end, millions of people were being murdered, they did actually believe that there was a problem with the Jews, and that the ideology of the Nazis was actually something that they didn't have too many problems with. Would you not agree with them?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to say this, but the feeling I had when I was here in the late 50s onwards was a desire to connect, to be accepted.
Yes.
Yeah. That was the feeling.
And so was it the typical British thing is, don't talk about the war? Was that something, did you avoid the topic of the Nazis and the war, or was it something you spoke about openly?
You didn't really talk about the war. No. I mean, one is trying to start from zero, as I said. Munich was not flattened, but parts of it certainly were flattened, and you were just rebuilding, and just. I think the camaraderie, I think human relations were much closer than they are now.
Yeah, in what way?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think, I mean, you use public transport, yeah, and there's no eye contact now. It's all looking at their phones.
Right.
Yeah, even if you.
But surely back in the 50s, everybody had their eyes on their newspapers.
Sorry?
Everybody was reading their newspapers back in the 50s and 60s.
Well, that's true. Yeah, but that's not. I think there was a lot more contact.
Yeah. As far as the Germans themselves were concerned, I mean, the whole stage in which they began to learn fully about the Nazi times and to actually feel. I'm not going to say they're responsible, it's possibly not them, it's their parents, whatever, but the acceptance and the admittance, admitting for the first time maybe that they had done something very bad. That didn't happen until later, no?
I think they saw themselves as the guilty party, certainly.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
This is from straight after the war, is it?
I think so. Okay. It was very different, because I don't think the First World War was a very patriotic war. I mean, there was no conscription in Britain until after the Somme, until 1916. It was carried on. Patriotism. Whereas the Second World War, I don't think the average German wanted the Second World War. The average German.
Nobody wants war, but weren't they led to believe through all the propaganda over years and years that they had no choice?
Probably, because they felt they'd been unjustly treated with their sire, I think. And then you had, of course, mass unemployment in the late 20s, early 30s. And preparing for war, or making themselves strong in that sense as a military force.
Oh, exactly. Turning turning the economy into a war economy, that's guaranteed to create jobs, isn't it?
Yeah. And, I mean, Autobahn, they were all built in the 30s. Not like the British began with the M1 in the 50s, cars breaking down.
We're still behind. Look at our railways.
Yeah.
We're a long way behind.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Philip. Okay, Philip, thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Well, it was a pleasure. A trip down memory lane.
Exactly. Good. Thank you very much, Philip. You take care. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.